So I think there's a way to reconcile all this. What it should have been is he walks in the room, Lauren goes, "What the fuck?" Then he's like, "Shh, no, it's cool." And she's like, "Oh, Arnold?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm a robot now." She's like, "Oh, okay." And then they have the conversation.
You look so young. Are you from a different time?
Black don't crack.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And Ashley Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And this is our deep dive edition where we look back on this week's episode of Westworld and provide our thoughts and analysis, plus our research for the week. This week's episode was the season 3 finale, Crisis Theory, and it is the last episode of Westworld for the season, but it is not our last edition. We still have several more podcasts coming, including another Telegraph, the Westie Awards, which is your voting awards for your favorite moments and characters of Westworld Season 3, a Mean Tweets edition where we're going to read reviews and tweets that came in over the season, and there are many, and much, much more. So stay tuned for that. If you are subscribed, please stay subscribed. If you aren't subscribed, there's still time to do so. It's totally free. Just get us wherever you get your podcasts. So guys, this week's episode was episode 8, the end of Westworld Season 3. What'd you think?
On my second viewing, I don't think my opinion changed much. It's a beautifully shot show. There's a lot of scenes that are compelling. It's well put together. Some of the special effects, like where Dolores is getting the new pearl, that stuff it blows your mind. The complaints you have, they stayed the same, but in a kind of uneven season, I'm excited for season 4 and not disappointed, but just thinking what they could have done that could have made this the best season.
Yeah, my opinion didn't change pretty much at all. I tried to give it its due. I watched it actually 2 more times just to make sure that I was being fair. And I got into a lot of conversations today. I will say that by and large, everyone I've talked to, other than maybe just a few outliers, were pretty disappointed in this episode. YouTube, especially, about 98% of the comments have been not complaining, but just expressing disappointment about this episode and how it wrapped up the season. And I have to say, I kind of am of the same vein. I agree with you, Big D. I think there's a lot of what could have been, and I think there was a lot of potential. I just don't know if they finished it out the way that was best for the season and for the series, because they lost a lot of viewers with this new switch to the genre and with season 3. And I think that the way that this is translating, we may see an even steeper decline with season 4.
I'm anything but an optimist, but I've read a lot of books where every chapter didn't hit. And I think that Westworld in itself is a tale that is meant to be told in its entirety. So I'm willing to wait until season 4. This might have been this awkward, growing phase for the show that had to get us to somewhere else. But as we said on the Instacast, I think that we do have a springboard here for a very interesting story. But I agree with you, Ash. It wasn't necessarily executed in the best way. And if you are going to be the flagship for HBO, you got to really bring a strong game.
Yeah, and I think, we're coming from a place of love. We dedicate how many hours of our lives each week to this show. So if anyone misconstrues what we're saying as something, you don't like the show, we're coming from a place of love. We're hoping the show can always be its best. And even if it's great, we would always talk about the ways that it could be a little bit better because they have the talent in front of this camera and behind the camera. This could be one of the best shows on TV.
Now, our deep dive is different from most TV podcasts in that we're not going to go scene by scene, but instead we go bucket by bucket in the main topics. Now, this deep dive is going to be different from a lot of deep dives in that there's really one big thing we want to focus on, and that's the remaining questions coming out of episode 8. Now, the season finale did a great job closing out season 3 and answering most of the big questions that we started out with, but there were other questions, or you might even call them plot holes that emerged throughout this episode, things that we thought would be wrapped up and other things that came up out of nowhere that we really want to look deeper into. So we're going to cover that in the deep dive. We're also going to go over sort of character redemption and reduction. Episode 8 saw a lot of characters finally shine after several episodes of being neglected, but also other characters that we thought would have a resounding ending or a triumphant moment really seemed to fizzle out. So we're going to go through those. And then we're going to close out with a couple odds and ends and closing thoughts on the season. Now, part of these plot holes or remaining questions is that we don't necessarily know the answers. And that's going to be up to you to write into us. So if you want to write us at host@shatontv.com or call 914-719-SHAT and let us know your thoughts on these plot holes and remaining questions. We'd love to hear them and share them on the Telegraph, which comes out Friday. Now, Ash, you spent hours doing research and really investing a ton of time into examining this episode from lots of different angles and the season in general. What did you find?
Well, I kind of want to start out with a little bit of a PSA to kind of build off of the PSA that you've already given about how this deep dive is different. I want to make clear before we begin to kind of discuss through these things that what I'm about to talk about and some of the opinions I'm about to express, I don't mean to say that I'm disappointed in the choices the show made, in the sense that I didn't have a vested interest of them having one outcome or another. It didn't matter to me who were in the pearls. I just wanted to know who were in them, for instance, right? And so this is not complaining that I didn't get my way. It's more, I think it's important for us to kind of explore whether or not some of these major plot points that they set up for us for season 3, did they come to any sort of a satisfying conclusion by the close of the season? And you said the word plot hole, and I think that's a really good way to talk about some of these things that people are saying they're disappointed, these questions that they're left with. And so if we're going to say plot hole, what I mean by that is something that's kind of either left unfulfilled or unfinished, leaving us to kind of make our own guess and do what's, I believe, is killer in terms of narrative storytelling, which is to assume that things just are what they are because the show and the writers have forced us into a corner where we just have to believe that that's the case. It isn't that it makes sense that we got there. The path didn't lead us there, but that's what we're now given, and we just kind of have to accept it. And so moving into this, there are some plot holes that are defined in that way, I think, for the season, and some lingering questions that we have that set us up for season 4. And we kind of thought that maybe it would be a good idea to begin to work through these, to begin to digest what we just saw last night.
And as a PSA to your PSA on my PSA, I should add that this sort of thing isn't always bad. So giving an audience a little room for imagination and continued discussion is great. It keeps podcasts alive. So thanks, showrunners. Plus, we know that Westworld is expected to return for a season 4. So it's not like we're saying we demand answers now. The issues with these particular plot holes is that the show spent valuable time creating these pathways that led nowhere. And someone might say, well, that's life, right? Things just happen sometimes for no reason. And it is a reality in life, but it doesn't necessarily make for good drama. Imagine a play that spends an entire act covering events and conspiracies and characters and props that have zero bearing on the end story. It's fine in reality. That's the world, right? But it's very bad for drama. You'd be disappointed that you spent $8 or $15 or $80 to see that play, and there was an entire 15 minutes of it that went nowhere.
Right. It's like going to see Romeo and Juliet ends up with Mercutio's ghost at the end. And it's like, oh, awesome. It would make absolutely no sense. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves. And so the first one that we want to talk about actually has to do with Dolores. So we had two kind of, we'll call them reveals in the last episode, which is that Dolores's plan all along was benevolent toward humans, that she wanted to help them in some sort of way. She wasn't just trying to annihilate them. And of course, I'm talking about what we assume is Dolores Prime here, the one that we see erased. And then the secondary kind of reveal is that Bernard has the key. So considering those things, I think that specifically with Bernard having the key, I think that's a fine plot point. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's neat. It actually makes Bernard really useful. It makes him necessary. And I think we all kind of expressed that we wanted him to be both of those things, both useful and necessary by the end of this season. And I'm glad that because of this, it looks like Bernard's going to have a much larger role to play in season 4 and perhaps beyond. But my question is, why couldn't Dolores just tell them her plot from the beginning, specifically Bernard and Maeve? What was the benefit plot-wise of keeping everybody guessing and in the dark about her intentions? Is she good? Is she bad? Is she going to kill everybody? Or is she not? What was the purpose? Why couldn't she have told them? I think it would have given us this field scene a bit earlier that I think we all enjoyed, that wrapped some things up. It would have given Bernard some belonging that was sorely needed. And I get that maybe they wanted this to be a big reveal, but I don't think it came across as a big reveal. They shoved it in our face all season. I have something in my head. Dolores put something in my head. And when we found it's the key, it's like, okay, great. It didn't really wow us. And they could have let us in the audience know, I think, and Bernard wouldn't have felt so much like kind of a hanger-on the entire season.
I think you're right on the money, Ash. Bernard holding the key, it was the answer to the big question season 2 left unanswered, right? We saw Dolores rebuilding Bernard, but saying that he wasn't necessarily her friend or on her side, and people had different theories as to what that meant. I think maybe the showrunners expected us to figure it out first, so we're supposed to be in the know, but Bernard doesn't know quite yet, and so we're watching Bernard make the discovery. That might have been the idea. Also, Dolores doesn't trust anyone but herself. I mean, we see that in the fact that she only made clones of herself. So it makes sense that she kept the plan secret. Maybe the whole idea was letting anybody know until the last minute could have spoiled the whole thing.
But we've been led to believe throughout the entire season that Dolores has been meticulous. She has planned out everything. She has thought about everything that one of the players could do, and then she's already had a countermeasure to that. But I'm starting to think her plan was more blind luck and happenstance than a mastermind. In retrospect, it's a little bit risky for Dolores to allow Bernard. He's one of the most wanted men in the world. He's got posters of him that even these meatheads in the meat farm recognize him. And he's walking around with the key in his head. What if he was captured? Let's just say he was captured on the mainland. They take him in. Oh, shit, you're not human. He's going to get handed over to Incite. Not only that, but he goes to Incite on his own. And the Connell's Dolores encounters him and Stubbs and says, yo, here, go do this. Here's your mission. Instead of being like, dude, you got the key in your head. Get the fuck out of here. Get out of here now.
Well, to be fair, Connells did tell him he's the only one that can't be replaced. And then everyone proceeded to tell him, you're the only one who can't be replaced. If Rehoboam was listening at all inside his own building, he would have been like, maybe I should stop that guy. He seems important.
Yeah. So that, I mean, it seemed like some of these plans she had could have gone the other way and just undermined everything she'd done. With Caleb, her whole big thing is, I want to give humans the choice. We're going to give humans a choice. She makes these major sacrifices, kills innocent people along the way, destroys the world. And then the way she gives choice to everyone is to give it to one person. So she didn't even give it to them. What happens, let's just say, if Caleb says, yeah, I think Rehoboam's a good deal. Let's leave him in place. People don't get a free choice.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. I think a lot of her plan, while in theory sounded fine, there isn't, at least from my perspective, a whole lot of rhyme or reason but why she made certain choices. Like, for example, how did she distribute these Pearl identities? So Charlotte Hale makes a lot of sense because you need somebody at Delos, and I think Connell's makes a lot of sense because you need somebody at Incite. But what about these other people? I mean, why make host copies to begin with? Why wouldn't you make doppelgangers of other humans? Wouldn't that be more effective? And specifically, why did she choose these secondary hosts to put her pearls in? And that leads me to, why the fuck was Lawrence there? Why Lawrence of all people? How did he become a member of the police? I know that we're supposed to assume that he's the Pearl in Berlin, but he goes from Berlin to San Francisco and all of a sudden he's a San Francisco police officer? Who was the guy with him in the mask? Why did he not show his face? Is it Teddy? Who knows? I mean, that's going to be the tinfoil between seasons 3 and 4 is who is this guy, right? I just think it was a huge wasted opportunity for Dolores to include either other hosts that we cared about from a showrunner perspective or from a strategic perspective to include humans or hosts that made a bit more sense to put her brain into, to put her identity into.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you would try to create a character that's incognito. You've got all the software there. Just create generic dude. The guy who could walk down the street with khakis and a polo on and nobody would even know him. Instead, you have these beautiful, you have Dolores and you have Charlotte and you have Maeve. People are going to spot them, but you wouldn't spot, Joe Plumber.
Well, you're not going to spot Lawrence. I mean, right? Lawrence looks a little bit like Joe Blow.
Yeah,
but
yeah, that's perfect.
But why do you spend all this time injecting Caleb with the blood of some human? Why don't you just make a human doppelganger of whatever guy you needed to get the money? I mean, it just seems kind of crazy.
When season 3 started, we talked about whether 8 episodes were enough. And here you had these characters that were reintroduced. So it would have been a great opportunity to explore them. So you get Clem, you get Lawrence, you get Hanario. They're all introduced into this season and they feel like weird choices that don't really have a purpose beyond one singular task. And I got to even ask the question, why couldn't you have regular dudes do those singular tasks? Like you need to take Musashi out, send like 30 dudes after him. That would probably do the job. Literally anybody, like normal humans could have done this. Get Rico app on it, right? An extra 2 episodes this season really would have helped explore maybe how these hosts were interfacing with the world around them, right? So their versions of what they saw, whether it was LA or Berlin or anywhere in the world, Jakarta. Also, Ash, I agree. I'm super surprised there isn't tinfoil about that other cop. He never showed his face. He seems to be okay with Lawrence. What's going on there?
Yeah, we had the briefcase, right? Like he's bringing the briefcase out, so he's gotta be involved somehow. And you mentioned Rico just a second ago. I'll tell you on my rewatches, one of the things that clicked and made a lot of sense for me in this final episode was the brilliance of Dolores employing the Rico assistants to help she and Caleb make their way through the quietest, most docile riot that LA has ever seen, right? So she needed all of these armed guys to help her, and it made a lot of sense. And I couldn't help but ask, okay, why didn't she do this the entire time? I think she could have gotten some more horses. They could have gone, with her to, through Mexico. They could have ridden through the desert in a horde of horses. What is it? A horde, a murder, a gaggle of horses?
You live in Texas. You've just embarrassed yourself.
Well, I'm terrified of horses.
I believe it's a herd.
A herd of horses, like a herd of cattle.
They introduce early on the ability of Dolores' assistant when she's negotiating a lease. They introduce that point so that later, when Caleb is running for his life and she says, negotiate a better price, we don't question it. They put thought into that, but why not use Rico, like Gene said, for everything? Simple. Keep your hands clean.
Using an app or a car or any other sort of technology lets Rehoboam know where you're going, right? That's how I read it, at least, was like they wanted to keep it low tech, stay off the grid. But it does beg the question is, as Dolores is using Rico to summon forces to help her out, why doesn't Rehoboam be like, no, that shit ain't flying with me?
Exactly. Delete her profile, suspend her, put her on timeout.
I would like to report a Dolores. She is being offensive on this app against me, Rehoboam.
Well, it's the ultimate outlier, right? I mean, that's what doesn't make sense. And I mean, but you're talking about like the tracking. I mean, they'd be able to track the virtual assistant too, you would assume. Like any technology, they'd be able to track. And so Rehoboam has to see her making these reservations so they would know exactly where she negotiated the room, you would assume, right? I mean, just again, it's just a hole. It's just a hole in the explanation. The next one, I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me on or not, because I know that both of you and myself really like the emotional aspect of the scene with Bernard and Arnold's wife and how nice that was. But again, on rewatch, I was going, because I was so caught up in the emotional aspect of it on the first time. I didn't realize how strange this would be if your husband, who's been dead for decades, all of a sudden showed up. Because if Tom is dead, for literally decades. He's killed himself, and a copy of him when he's young just walks in. I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm yelling Zombie Tom. I'm asking if he's a vampire because he's not aged. I'm certainly not going to sit calmly with him, rub his hand, tell him how I got over our son's death. That's not a normal reaction. And this just did not make sense to me upon rewatch.
So with the caretaker, I was led to believe that Lauren has some sort of dementia. What I was thinking is maybe through the grief of losing a child and then losing Arnold under suspicious circumstances, maybe her grip on reality plus the dementia has caused her to sort of have breaks with what's happening in the real world. Maybe she has these conversations with Arnold all the time, especially since she says she doesn't believe in letting go. And then if you want to add another layer to the explanation, again, this is me writing fan fiction for the show. Maybe she knew what Arnold was working on, so she would have expected this sort of thing. Now, I did appreciate this scene, as you said, Ash, and a key reason why is we've been led through seasons 1 and 2 to look at cornerstones in a negative light. That cornerstones is what keep people in a loop. It keeps them locked in and subservient. And Lauren did this amazing job presenting that light side of a cornerstone, right? It's what keeps you moving. It's what keeps you persistent in your endeavors. And I think that it was a beautiful bit of writing. But I do agree her response was peculiar in its calmness.
See, my thought was when he walks in the house and the caretaker doesn't recognize him, I'm gonna be like, what the fuck? There's got to be pictures of him in the house, pictures of the family, somewhere. But then when they talk about it more and you realize they were estranged. So it would make sense that she wouldn't have pictures of Arnold up in the house. But I do love the fact of why they did this scene. I said on the Instacast that it was to free Bernard of the guilt. I think it's more important. Bernard is one of the characters who has questioned every moment of his reality. How much is real? Is it Bernard? Is it Arnold? Is the cornerstone real? Is any of this? And the fact to find out that all the emotions and that deep down under all those layers of code, there was a human being, that this was real. I think it's a liberating thing that Bernard needs for chapter 4 of the show and beyond.
So I think there's a way to reconcile all this. What it should have been is he walks in the room, Lauren goes, "What the fuck?" Then he's like, "Shh, no, it's cool." And she's like, "Oh, Arnold?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm a robot now." She's like, "Oh, okay." And then they have the conversation.
You look so young. Are you from a different time?
Black don't crack.
Yeah.
Well, the next, I think that a lot of us have been asking ourselves the following question today, which is, when did Caleb remember Dolores from these training sessions from Park 5? When did that happen? I do like a lot that they finally gave us some hard evidence that Caleb is not just a bad guy through and through. I think that was really important for us to see an example of the good in Caleb. But when does he remember that she was there as one of these women that he rescued? Is it a breakthrough memory? Did Dolores send it to him telepathically as she laid plugged into Ultron? Did Maeve send it to him? How did that happen? And I think that this is a perfect example and being indicative of the greater problems maybe that this season had, which is that assumption issue that I just talked about a few minutes ago. We're kind of just left to accept this information. And generally I would be fine with that. I'm not going to sit and complain about minor things, but the problem is they just had spent an entire episode explaining how he got his memories back and showing us how he got his memories restored. And it just seemed like a very strange add-on. It was fine. It was nice, but the actual reveal and the way it happened, I thought was a little clunky in the grand scheme of things.
But I kind of telegraphed it when we first saw that scene and they had that weird cut where they were doing the Nebraska domestic terrorist. And the one guy's like, "Hey, you know what those rich people do?" I'm like, okay, here comes Caleb to the rescue. But I don't know. In real life, you could line up and I'm old now, all the people I've had sex with, right? And mix in some strangers. I could not identify at this point in my life everyone that I've had sex with. So the fact that Caleb remembers Dolores, who really didn't have that big of an impact on his life, I'm more amazed at that. But maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I really want to go treasure hunting here. I need to rewatch the season and explore whether Westworld did lay a trail here that I just didn't see. Because the Park 5 mention seemed rather convenient. Like, if I go back and I see that in some of these flashbacks, Dolores was there, I'd be like, okay, like it was a gradual memory that was coming back to him over time. I could get that. But Ash, I agree. It's like it suddenly appeared for us, the audience, but when did it appear for Caleb? Also, I thought it weird that Dolores was in Park 5 when she was. It seems like a real waste of the original. So we know at this point, based on how the Man in Black has aged, that William had already been to the park. He'd already discovered Dolores. And yes, he was gone for a long time. But at the time that William met her, she was Peter Abernathy's daughter. So Caleb comes along. Dolores already has a role as the daughter. They shift her off to Park 5 to be in some sort of a military test. Does that seem like an appropriate use of this resource?
Well, beyond that, I think that we're led to believe that we're given like an answer as to why Dolores chose him. And out of all the humans you've interacted with, you remember one guy decades ago that didn't want to rape you. Like, I figure you got to encounter some nicer people than that. And she even says that to Maeve. She says, okay, I've seen their capacity for goodness. And there's those quick little flashes, which I actually really enjoy, those quick little flashes of the wonderful moment she has. And I love the little Easter egg there of the first time William picks up the can. That was really beautifully done. So you've had all these interactions with people. That's why you chose him, is because of this one action. That's indicative of his whole personality. And you just kind of mark that like, hey, if I ever get sentience and I decide to pick someone to choose the fate of humanity, it's going to be that guy.
Just remember, a couple episodes ago, we talked about how for hosts, everything is present. Their memories are perfect, right? So it's like it happened today. I'm sure she's encountered wonderful people. In season 1, we saw that family where she was out painting and the kid came over, was like, are you one of them? Like, they seem like nice people. Yeah. She's probably cataloged all the nice people. And just the fact that Caleb happened to be one of the outliers that she could use, it's just, I think she put 2 and 2 together. There has to have been other nice people.
Well, I think to add on to that, probably Park data showed that of all the people, he had this X factor that they're calling capacity for choice, and that made him sort of the chosen one for Dolores.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, it just maybe would have been nice to have an additional 2 episodes to maybe explore some of that a bit more. I don't have a problem with that being the answer. I think that's fine. I just wish we had a little bit more exposition to just kind of connect all the dots. And that brings me to another question, which is, why is the world ending now? Because we see Rehoboam has his gasp of a last breath and goes dark. And we know that from that moment, the kind of the soothsaying that he does, the last bit of oracle telling that he does right before that, where he says, and he shows them on the screen that like in 5 to 10 years, there's mass casualties, and 20 to 30 years, there's mass casualties, and then 50 to 125 years, mankind is extinct. But for me, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be an eventual destruction, but the world literally starts to implode upon the ending. And when Maeve and Caleb are having their Fight Club moment there on the bridge overlooking the city, there's a massive explosion in the distance. All of a sudden, all the buildings start exploding. I guess I just wanted to ask you guys and the listeners out there, did I miss something? Why is him shutting down causing a literal implosion?
I don't think that it's necessarily him shutting down. I think this is still fallout from episode 5 genre. So there was that big data dump. People are losing their shit and it's building up little by little. I mean, think about the coronavirus right now. People started to get weird at about week 3. Now they're just full on bonkers, right? And people are just, I'm acting weird. And so I think that it's just this gradual falling apart, this entropy of society, people tearing down the system to rebel against being shown their lives are predetermined. And that's actually a pretty logical reaction. If somebody tells you everything you've ever done is predetermined and you have no choice, I think the best way to demonstrate choice in most people's minds is just to do completely irrational shit.
We haven't seen enough to say that this apocalypse is worldwide. You know that there's civil unrest, there's people, that the system is collapsing, but we can't make an assumption that the whole world just implodes. I'm sure different areas of the world will react differently to it. And until we're showing the entire world like up in flames, I'm willing to think this could be a somewhat isolated incident.
It is interesting that they went from like party in the streets to like explosions and high-rise buildings. Like, what's blowing up there?
Also, Dolores, that's Dolores, right? Why was Dolores, who wants to give people free will, all of a sudden blowing up buildings? How does that help her, her plot?
Looks cool.
Yeah, it looks cool. Yeah, it looks cool. Yeah,
they're
exactly.
blowing up all the credit card companies, like at the end of Fight Club. That's what's happening. It's mayhem. But that kind of wraps up the plot hole discussion that we wanted to have. And now we're going to kind of go into some of the unanswered questions that are actual questions, legitimate questions that are going to maybe bridge us from season 3 to 4. And I think for me, one of the more interesting ones is, where did Bernard go and for how long? So I know that we see that he connects into the Valley Beyond. He has a moment where he goes kind of dark, and then in our post credit scene, he becomes active again. And so obviously we're going to have to figure out within the beginning, I would figure in season 4, where was he? We assume it's the Valley Beyond. He has that moment of recognition and it looks like happiness. What is he seeing? Just like how Stubbs asks that. What happened to Stubbs? Is he still on ice? I mean, that's a question. How many beers deep is Stubbs in at this point? And then finally, how's that all going to play into next season's endgame? This is a pretty big question.
I think the best clue we have is what Bernard tells Stubbs when Stubbs asks what he's looking for, right? So Bernard says, I'm looking for an answer to what comes after the end of the world. I think that he goes into the Sublime to get that answer. Now, remember, the Sublime is a simulation of a sort of a host heaven. So in itself, as a simulation, it might have its own future, its own projections. It might be able to show a person what's going to happen at an accelerated rate. And so perhaps Bernard goes in there, finds his answer, and then has to sort of wait for the end of the world to begin his work. I can't believe he didn't leave Stubbs at least with like a 6-pack.
Time isn't constant. When you're in a simulation, it could run much faster. So we don't know how long he was in it. But my bigger question, and I'm just going to also retract an earlier statement I just made about how do we know this wasn't an isolated incident? The fact that Bernard's been sitting on that bed for what Lisa Joy said was a very, very, very long time. No room service has come. Obviously, the hotel's not being used. It's covered in a layer of dust. You can assume the world has possibly ended. But I'm more impressed by the batteries in that Halo device. My phone goes dead after 45 minutes, like sitting out. This thing lasted, what could be hundreds of years.
While we're figuring out what happened to Bernard, there are these secondary characters that we kind of got to know this season that I think there's a question about. What happened to Ash and Giggles? Are they okay? Is Giggles alive? What's going to happen to Ash now that she's in the back of that paddy wagon? I just feel like these two characters really were kind of shortchanged this season because I thought they were really interesting. I really enjoyed the interactions we had with them, but we kind of got no answers about who they were, their motivation other than making money on Rico, and we don't really know what eventually happened to them. And I'm hoping we get to see them again, that maybe they're part of this new revolution in season 4.
I wouldn't hold my breath. I mean, we saw Ash get arrested and never really learned what happened to Giggles. My gut tells me that a single bullet isn't going to kill Marshawn Lynch, so he's probably going to be okay. But seeing these characters again, I'd love to. I don't know if it's going to happen.
Oh, I think it's definitely going to happen. They've laid the groundwork. We know that Dolores has infiltrated the SFPD. So it wouldn't be too hard for Lawrence's first action would be to have a jailbreak, because they spent time to develop them and people love them. You got to bring them back. And you can't kill Marshawn Lynch. Nothing can kill him.
Well, and I'm sorry if Lawrence, of all people, gets a pearl. Giggles and Ash have a shot at getting a pearl or being a part of something in the next season. But with regard to next season, though, we didn't get a lot of time with Delos this season at all. This was more of the Incite introduction season. So I guess a general question is Delos open and what's happening with it? Because you're talking about isolated incidents. Looks like Dubai's doing fine, because when William shows up at Delos Dubai's headquarters, all kind of seems normal, business as usual. So Serac, we know he bought Delos, but Delos seems to be operating fine. So are there still parks operating? Did Serac die and somehow now Charlotte Hale has control again? I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that I think are pretty interesting, and I'm excited to see how they explain that Hale's building a full army there with no oversight.
Now, I mistakenly conflated the end of Rehoboam with the end of Delos, but that logically actually doesn't make sense at all because Delos and Incite aren't the same company. Yes, Serac bought Delos, but there was no time for like integration or anything like that. So just so we're clear, Delos and Incite aren't the same company, and Caleb controls Rehoboam, which he just wiped. So yeah, Serac's dead, but that doesn't mean Caleb just automatically gets control of Incite. There's no connection there. So it would seem that the corporate structure, at least for now, is still intact.
Yeah, and I think the parks were only a small component. The main value of the company was the IP. So if you have another facility in Dubai that was doing some kind of manufacturing, maybe that's where they produced the riot robots that they use so well in this episode. And she's just converting that to start to make hosts. But if Serac is pulled out of the equation, then Delos, you assume, would operate as normal. You know, unless he would come in, the normal command structure and the leadership is in place.
I mean, they did kill the whole fucking board, though, so...
You just have to send out calls to new board members.
Well, and that kind of brings us to our final question, which I don't think there's an actual answer to at this point, but that is, did we need this season? That's what a lot of, if you go on and you read any of the reviews and you put any stock in that, a lot of the critics are asking this question today, having seen all 8 episodes. A lot of people on Twitter, a lot of viewers are asking, was this season necessary? And we talked on the Instacast about how we're firmly back at square one, where we left off at the end of season 2. Of course, we do have a bit more understanding of the human world. We got some new characters, but what did we really learn to advance our story forward? Now, as you said at the beginning, Jean, you kind of stole my thunder here in the sense that I agree with you. I think Westworld's going to be a show that we need to judge when it's finished, when the entire anthology, when all the chapters are in place. And I think that we need to do 2 things before we can really approach this question of, did we need this season? 1 is we see the rest of the series. And 2, I think it's necessary to do a full season rewatch, to look at season 3 in its entirety. A lot of us, myself included, that had some issues with season 2 begin to really appreciate it more upon binging it and watching it in its full form. Maybe season 3 will age well in the same way. I personally don't want to do that right now. I need a bit of a break, some distance, because I'm a bit disappointed in some of the choices. But once that full picture comes into view, for me, I don't think this season was as successful as 2. I don't think it was anywhere near as successful as season 1. But I'm hopeful that with some time, we'll realize the purpose of this season and that it will propel us forward into a season 4 that I, for one, am pretty excited to get to explore with you guys again 2-3 years from now.
To answer the question, did we need this season? I would say it's an emphatic yes. I don't know if it was executed perfectly, but this season showed us the genesis of an apocalypse. Like, it's a critical part of a bigger story. The price that humans paid to break free. If we just jumped ahead to humans are free in some apocalyptic world, or the hosts are in the remains of the old world, we'd wonder what the fuck happened. So, Rehoboam saw it, Serac saw it, Caleb saw it, and I think Bernard said it best. He said, our world had to burn down before we could be free. But there's still a chance. I think he's saying essentially that humans have to go through that same metamorphosis. I don't think he's talking about avoiding a global extinction event. I think that's a foregone conclusion. I think Serac said that war has already been lost. But can humanity in some form soldier on? And I think that, was the season done well? That's up to the audience. Was the season necessary? Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was necessary because it's going to bridge the story. Season 1 was about the hosts evolving, gaining a conscious, gaining freedom. Season 2 was them breaking free. And, whereas the first season was about how all humans were terrible, the second season, we see that hosts are capable of some atrocities on their own. In this one, we start to see that humans without free will, they can't evolve. They can't change. Hosts, you could just throw a line of code in. Dolores goes from wanting to annihilate the world, just flipping like a switch and changes everything. They're more fluid. They have more freedom and more capability. So I think this season was needed to kind of put the hosts and humans both on even footing. They've both gone through a transition period, and now it's going to be a battle between the two for supremacy. If you started out with the host going out into the regular world and the regular world was stable, they'd get annihilated. You'd find them eventually and you'd snuff them out. So this way, at least there's a chance to see who or both deserve to live.
So every great TV show is a combination of production, plot, and characters. And we've covered really the plot and the plot holes for Westworld Season 3, but I wanted to take some time to talk about some key characters and whether the show wasted them entirely or redeemed itself in giving them logical and satisfying arcs. And I want to start with Bernard because I think that was the one that was most up in the air. So Bernard really got the spotlight twice this season. There was the first time when he returned to Westworld, he was the star of the show, right? That episode was essentially about him. He's searching for answers. He finds Stubbs. And then again in episode 8, when he visits Lauren in Crisis Theory, right? So as this season closed, they revealed Bernard has a huge role. He is the gatekeeper to the Sublime. And so I think it's reasonable to hope for brighter times ahead for him. He's going to play a big role in the series going forward. So they did right by Jeffrey Wright in that sense. But other than that, this season, I think Jeffrey Wright's role really fluctuated wildly from like comic relief to befuddled weird guy to just straight up brutalizing others on screen. This is Bernard. This is a guy who had us hooked, who we were hanging on his every word in season 1. In season 3, we're laughing at him. He pops up in that mask at the auction and everyone's laughing at him. In Decoherence, he shows up in that like Backstreet Boys look in the AR chamber, and we're laughing at him again. I don't know how to feel about how this season treated Bernard.
Yeah, I agree. I felt really sorry for him because go back to episode 1 and how excited we were to see what he was going to do this season because we found him at the meat factory. He looked like a badass. He had the new haircut. We were introduced to valet mode, and all of a sudden, things just kind of went downhill from there once he got in touch with Stubbs, and they became their, fierce duo that kind of moved forward throughout the season. And I think that that's a bummer because Bernard he's a great character. And I was reminded in this episode why we all loved Bernard. And that gives me hope for him moving forward.
Why would you not want him in more of the show? He's compelling. And I think, again, this is one of those cases of something that could have been done better is to choose to allocate time to him. He kind of strings the whole seasons and series together. Plus he's just an incredible actor.
Now, Ash, you mentioned Stubbs, and Stubbs is another character where in season 1, we thought he was super cool. He's the head of Westworld security. He's like that one vigilant guy that's like, I don't trust the host. I'm always going to carry my gun. Turns out he was right. And at the same time, he pushed back on authority, but was always faithful to his duties. I remember distinctly that episode where we first saw a hint that Stubbs could be a host. He did a little nod and a wink, and the audience was thrilled. And then in season 3, I don't think any of us saw him becoming basically the poor man's version of Fat Thor. Like there was that axe fighting scene. There's the motel beers. There's like the ice bath death. I mean, we saw Stubbs reduced to chubs, and it was upsetting.
Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't help but think those healing wand things that they have, they don't take that long to work. I mean, you can't fix the guy you coerced and literally changed his code to come before you put on your Halo thing. I mean, that's too much to ask. Think about the benefit if you heal him and you have somebody there to watch your ass while you're going into wherever you're going. It made no sense. And what a sad end for Stubbs, because there's that line drop where he said, you won't start to rot if we put you in ice. Well, if it's hundreds of years have passed, you got to figure the guy's nothing but goo at this point.
But dude, that's the ultimate dick move, right? He's in the back of the car. He's bleeding. He's like, don't worry. My time is short. I'm going to heal you. I'm going to fix you. I'm going to go in there and meet Dolores. When he comes out, he's going to be like, oh, so what did Dolores say? Oh, it wasn't Dolores. It was my ex-wife. We were just talking about the past. Stubbs is going to be like, dude, fucking fix me now. Come on.
Yeah, time is of the essence. I'm going to power down for 100 years.
Yeah.
Next, I wanted to talk about Maeve. And if you guys think we're being unfair here, listeners, I need you to know that even Tandy Newton was upset about Tandy Newton's role this season and actually last season. So she did an interview with Joanna Robinson, which is fantastic. Definitely check it out. Joanna Robinson is killing it this year. And Tandy Newton said she missed the uncompromising agency that was central to Maeve as a character. Maeve became a very wishy-washy, pliable, malleable character in season 3, which is the antithesis of what we loved about her. And all I can say is at least the season 3 finale with her standing there on the overlook with Caleb and watching LA burn gave us hope for a better Maeve in season 4. I think that's what Tandy Newton is saying. She suffered through 2 seasons so that she could get something great in the payoff, but woof. And speaking of Caleb, I'm going to catch heat for saying this, but every episode after genre, episode 5, it stripped another layer off my love affair with Caleb as a character. Like, he started off this season complex and conflicted and mysterious and relatable. And in the end, the thing that makes him great is his capacity for choice. This feels very Bran a la Game of Thrones. You had the best story, Caleb, so you sit on the throne now. Like, I can accept that Caleb is not a supernatural being. He's not Neo from the Matrix. And I can accept that Caleb doesn't have some grand legacy like Luke Skywalker. He's just a guy, right? But if they wanted to sell this capacity for choice explanation, we need a much more controversial character. They say that he has this propensity for violence. I want to see that rage. Where's the violence? Caleb needed to be something equally terrifying to the Man in Black to matter in this way. And sadly, I just don't think Aaron Paul could carry that out. When he was in scenes that called for physicality, he looked utterly impotent.
Dolores said, I used to be a bit player also, and then I decided I wanted to do more. Caleb seems to be okay with just being a bit player. Why are they calling me sir? Okay, let's go to Incite. Da, 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 da. Well, there's a riot. Let's walk calmly through. There's no urgency in what he's doing. There's no passion. You want a leader, a John Connor, who's going to fight for humanity. And he's just kind of like, yeah, we got to get to Incite. Let's go, guys. Yeah.
He really is a very tiny man, isn't he? I was so surprised when the second round of Rico guys show up. And could they have not found shorter extras to surround him? Because he just looked like a little child. I mean, he's so small.
Oh, wow.
They could have done a Tom Cruise thing where they put him on lifts, or like they did an Interview with the Vampire with Tom Cruise next to Brad Pitt. They dug a trench for Brad Pitt to walk through so that they were the same height in all of their scenes. And they could have done that because, I mean, it really did. I agree with Eugene. I lost a lot of my initial excitement for him. And I don't know if I would use the word impotent, but he just looked tiny.
Oh, man. Oh, I just hear the people typing the hate mail right now. They're typing.
Now, Big D, don't be offended by this, but in friends of mine who have served in the Army and Marine Corps, it's those little guys that are the fucking meanest, though.
Oh, fuck yes. Are you kidding me? Yeah, the little guys, they're the feisty ones. But I wanted to see him feisty. Have him knock somebody out. Have a protester bump into him. Caleb just fucking puts him down.
He was straight up slap fighting when those guys pulled guns on him in Rehoboam's lair. He was like, and it went on for a while.
Also, you're breaking into Incite. You were in the military. Pick up a weapon. You're lucky the guard didn't have anything but that little, the wire where he was going to choke you out. Come on, plan ahead. It's all about planning.
So a big question that showed up after this episode aired was what happened to Dolores? Like, is she truly dead? I think all of us agree that this is not the last we'll see of Dolores. I felt like the season finale gave her a proper burial. Like, yeah, it was meh about her Age of Ultron torture at the hands of Rehoboam. But that final scene, as Ash, you mentioned, and Big D, you mentioned, they're in the field and she's speaking with Maeve, and it ends with Dolores smiling. And it's really quite powerful when you consider the entire journey of this incredible character's lifetimes, and we lived through them with her. I think Evan Rachel Wood did a remarkable job with the role, despite being handed some really clunky lines and motivations this season. When we said goodbye to her for the season, it felt right.
there are certain scenes, especially in the series, that you can feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up. When she's giving that speech about, I choose to see the beauty. And normally I'm just like, oh, come on. But in that sequence, she's seeing the man in black picking up the can of milk. When she says, I choose to see the beauty, she sees young William. She's saying, you know what he became isn't what I'm choosing to remember. And I thought that was dynamite and that emotionally connected for me. And I agree, Gene, if this is the last we've seen of her, she's going out in a way that she still holds that high esteem for me. And I loved it.
Now, from a point of satisfaction, I want to drop to a point of frustration, and that's with Charlotte. Charlotte in Crisis Theory did this extreme heel turn and, in my opinion, set up one of the most unlikable antagonists in Westworld lore. So her family, if you follow, got blowed up by Serac. So now she's building an army to do what exactly? Like, she's mad at Dolores for making her fight a war that she's now fighting anyway. I've got lots of love for Tessa Thompson. I think she did a great job in the action scenes. I think she's a fantastic actress. But her whole like Obi-Wan Halobi AR scenes were like dripping with just a little too much venom to take seriously. She was very like as a villain.
Obi-Wan Halobi.
But it wasn't even like a heel turn, because she did a heel turn, then went back and did it again. You remember, she's out there like in the park, like playing with her son, like, hey, I love my family. Wait, I'm going to go kill that pedo with the dog. Then she goes back to, hey, I'm with my family. She went back and forth all season.
Now, Big D, when we reviewed The City of Lost Children for Shat the Movies, you highlighted the importance of fitting endings for villains. You hate when a movie or a show gives a villain an easy way out. And I think that there's a certain poetry to a dramatic comeuppance, but I also understand that sometimes people just get killed. For Serac, I was a bit disappointed. Like, an off-camera stabbing felt cheap and poorly illustrated for such a tremendous character. There was a certain sadism to his character in this episode that seemed a little bit out of place, but we can attribute that to a desire to illustrate his fanaticism or his zeal toward his AI religion, right? So we've seen often that people pushed to the extremes of a religion or worship of a thing can turn on their fellow man and be quite malicious. So we'll let that go. On the upside, if we're going to praise the Serac character, at least the ending that he got, I thought that Vincent Cassel had a fantastic opportunity to explore Serac's utter despair at watching his god die. It was kind of lost in all the noise of this episode, but there was a scene where he was calling out to authority, like calling for the police, calling out to his brother. And in the end, you see that he's just this man with no particular power. He was utterly stripped of everything in an instant. That was powerful, and I really appreciate that Westworld took the moment to do that.
Well, there have been a lot of discussions about the whole Wizard of Oz thing this season, and that, that Serac is a wizard and Rehoboam is controlling all of Oz. And we saw that here, right? We saw the curtain pulled back and it's nothing but a simple man. Now, I do wish we had more time to explore the fact that literally everything he says is Rehoboam. And so there's an interesting line there between who is the villain really. Is it Serac or is it Rehoboam? And I personally think that makes Rehoboam a much bigger badass and much more of a nefarious AI than we initially saw, which makes his kind of petering out even more disappointing, his little gasp for breath and turning dark at the end. Because if he's saying everything to Serac and literally every word Serac is repeating, Serac isn't what's bad, Rehoboam is.
Yeah, and remember, this was Solomon's plan. He's executing Solomon's final plan, the one that got Serac to put his brother on ice. So even Solomon, who was schizophrenic, recognized that Rehoboam was such a problem. Hey, we got to shut him down. I would have loved to have seen an end where he really realized, I'm now powerless. I'm nothing. I've lost my influence. I've killed my own brother for what? And I hope he survives and we get to see him suffer longer, that all of this planning he had done for years, and it ends up there in that exact same place and same trajectory that they were before.
Now, this last character ending for season 3, I want to talk about with the understanding that everyone who watches Westworld watches the after credit scenes. I don't think there's anybody who's like, wait, there was an after credit scene? Like, everybody watches it. but still, sequence matters. So I want to talk about the Man in Black. So love him or hate him, the Man in Black was a pillar of the Westworld universe. He's up there with Dr. Ford. He's up there with Dolores. We spent 3 seasons learning about William's past, his relationships, his light side, his dark side, his passions, his sociopathic tendencies, his family, his business empire. Like, he is as real a character as we've seen on screen. I felt like I knew this guy. I felt like he was a real person who happened to appear on the TV show Westworld. And that reality was created through this seamless collaboration of Ed Harris and Jimmy Simpson. And HBO just takes him out in an after credit scene. It's like a throat slit and that's it. And again, I understand that life ends that way sometimes. People sometimes just die, but this can't be compared to like Ned Stark in Game of Thrones season 1. People are frail and easily killed, but the entire point of drama is to create an environment when tiny events feel huge in our hearts. And instead, Westworld just robbed us of this electrifying character, and there were still mysteries left to explore. There was so much more to do with this character, and just poof, he's gone.
Yeah, it is satisfying, though, to know that for sure Ed Harris will be back for season 4, because if Evan Rachel Wood doesn't come back, that makes me very concerned for what season 4 is going to bring, because I think she very much was the anchor for this season, as you pointed out. And so I'm glad to know he'll be back. And my favorite William is Man in Black William. And so I'm glad to know that that's the iteration that's coming back. And I think that that's satisfying. But I agree that that little slap fight and him getting pushed to the ground and then his throat getting slit, it was just kind of a bummer.
Actually, he looked like an old man. I felt kind of bad.
Well, he is an old man.
And we just shoving him on the ground. So I think this is also going to feed into the tinfoil factory. Somebody wrote in today, Ken C, and said, it's always been odd that the Man in Black chose to wear that cravat, that like little cardigan, when he's in the park as the Man in Black.
The ascot?
So now, the ascot. The ascot.
Cardigan's a sweater.
You can see I know a lot about fashion, but now there's like people suspecting, like, was that a host? And was he hiding the scar in his throat and the Man in Black actually survives?
No, it's what old people do to hide their wrinkles.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like 5 years away from ascot wearing. Before we close out the episode, I wanted to talk about a few odds and ends, just little things that we noticed at the episode that didn't fit into any other categories. One that struck me as odd was when Dolores said to Maeve that they built us to last before they made us as weak as they are. Now, obviously, it's a reference to the fact that hosts used to be these beautiful mechanical things that Dr. Ford marveled at and instead became biological to save on cost. I don't know, man. Charlotte seemed pretty fucking tough in that explosion. I don't know if they're that disposable.
Serac's men, when we get the Maeve and Musashi battle, right? And Maeve goes down, and then Musashi and the men run away because, Serac has sent his men there. They come into the distillery. Did they not look around for evidence and say, hey, what's in that one locked room with a big chain and a lock on it? Should we look in there, guys? No, let's just leave it there.
Well, I mean, it was a big padlock.
Yeah, but the chain, I mean, it's very simple to break. I mean, I put that like on a bike. Like it was not very complicated.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of bugged me about this episode, and honestly, this is with all TV, but I expect better from Westworld, is like, I feel like Westworld characters in season 3 were just a little too quick to get over things. You just watched Dolores get wiped. You knocked out Rehoboam. The whole world is falling apart. And Maeve's like, I think it's time for a one-liner. You can be whatever the fuck you want to be. Wink.
See, I actually thought that worked. That was one of the only I like a little bit of fan service. Fan service is something I'm not a huge fan of, but I really did enjoy that because I felt like it was a moment of, okay, this is Maeve coming back. Like, we're going to have real Maeve again. And I don't know. I kind of dug it. But I agree with you. Caleb was probably like, cool.
He's probably just wondering how long he has to hang out with her before he can leave. Like, he's like, all right, well, thanks and all, but got stuff to do. My friends just got arrested. I should probably go help them out. Anyway, before we move on to some final thoughts on the show, I wanted to give you guys 2 alerts, just ways that you can stay connected with the podcast. First of all, the Westies, that is our Westie Awards, where we honor the greatest moments, characters, and production of the season, are active now. So you can go vote at shatontv.com/Westies. Ash and I have poured hours into writing a beautiful blog post explaining all the nominees. Big D was very thoughtful in nominating several of the categories. And it's your time to vote. So you go ahead and vote in those. And then we will have an episode where we announce next week the winners of the Westies. So again, that's shatontv.com/Westies to vote. It doesn't cost anything. We're not going to get your email address. It's just fun for everybody to enjoy.
And it's also very prestigious. This is the 3rd annual Westies.
True.
You don't want to miss this. Our categories are not like the Oscars. We have some very special ones. And if you ever want to hear Gene talk about fashion, it is glorious to hear him describe what the characters wore. If you want to be deadly and intimidating, but also look fabulous, you want to dress in Maeve's black leather attire. It is delicious. I think it was something like that.
If you want your outfit to simultaneously say, I am a titan of industry and a Coke dealer, nothing beats a white suit with a white t-shirt, a la Serac. Also, Ash and I will be hosting a Mortal Kombat shootout Thursday night at 6:30 Pacific, 9:30 Eastern. It is only on Xbox One. We do apologize. It's something we were going to do anyway because I just really wanted to kick my ass at Mortal Kombat, but we thought it'd be fun to involve the listeners. So if you would like to play, just friend me on Xbox. I'm at Gene Lyons. It's GENE space LYONS. And message me Team Gene or Team Ash to let me know which team you want to be on. We'll take the first 8 players to respond. And if you'd like to watch that, you can tune in at shatontv.com/Twitch to join in the fun. So the fighting probably won't start at 6:30. We'll just get the games organized and then we'll start shortly after that. I am very much looking forward to that. By the way, it's Mortal Kombat 10. So if you have an Xbox Game Pass, it's totally free to play. Or if you have Mortal Kombat 10, go ahead and join us. Ash, I went into Mortal Kombat 10. I have no fucking clue who any of these people are.
Well, there's a lot of the originals. There's some people there, I'm sure, that you know. But I do think it's interesting that you're calling it a shootout, which means that, you know, maybe you don't quite understand the Mortal Kombat. But it's going to be really interesting. And I look forward to kicking your ass at something and getting to chat with some of our people about it. Maybe we can complain some more about some things and find some more plot holes and have a little bit of fun.
You guys have now, I'm ordering my Xbox One tonight.
Yes.
After hearing about this, Mortal Kombat, you got me. I'm in. I'll get destroyed, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, and judging by my performance in other fighting games, I'll be sitting out a lot and talking with you guys. So if you have anything you want to talk about Westworld, like Ash said, bring it. I just want to share some final thoughts on Westworld and really the proper way to enjoy it. Chaos was the theme for season 2, and it made for a wild ride, but it turned off a lot of the audience. I think we saw, as Ash mentioned, a big drop off in viewership. And I do think that the showrunners in season 3 earnestly endeavored to be really straightforward. They made it absolutely clear before we even got started, from the beginning, there are going to be no time jumps this season. What you see is what you get. But audiences, including the hosts of this podcast, we couldn't help ourselves. We're like, Westworld's a show of mysteries. We must dive into every crack in the vase. We can't just appreciate it as a work of art. And I think that level of scrutiny probably ruined the experience for a lot of people. So instead of applauding meticulous special effects or powerful individual performances or the charming new characters or the absolutely perfect music and the visionary representation of the near future, we were stuck debating what's real and who is who, and does this make sense scientifically? And I think Ash said it best midway through the season. Westworld has changed into a different kind of show from season 1. It's not better. It's not necessarily worse. It's just a different show, and we need to watch it differently. So I was having a conversation with the King Bee, of all people, the other day, and he was like, you know what? I enjoyed it. He said, it's a nice show to sit down and watch over Sunday dinner with your girlfriend. You don't have to scribble down notes. You don't have to scrutinize every frame. You don't have to rewatch it for clues. Just turn on the TV and enjoy it. And honestly, I can see that. Like, I wouldn't trade doing this podcast for more enjoyment out of my TV watching, but this is work for us, and it's work for the viewers who write in, and maybe the people creating the show didn't mean for it to be that way. Maybe that wasn't their intent.
I don't disagree with anything that you're saying, and I agree with you. I wouldn't trade doing this podcast to have enjoyed the season more, but I also think that you said something really important here, which is that this season endeavored to be really straightforward. And I think that they gave us that, but I don't think they asked themselves whether or not it worked for the story they were telling, because while it was very straightforward in some aspects, in the sense that the timeline was the same, and we didn't have any huge reveals that just totally threw us for a loop, I think the problem is they didn't allow for a story that could be told in a way without those moments of those major reveals that have those weight to kind of change the narrative that they were used to writing. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the holes develop. And it could have been budget. It could have been the issue where HBO wouldn't let them have 10 episodes. They only let them have 8. I mean, we don't know what happens behind closed doors, but I do agree with you that we had to change the way we watched it. And I very much enjoyed this show a lot more once we made that decision halfway through the season. And I feel like I sounded more negative than you guys in this episode because I was the one introducing the questions we agreed upon. So I'll just say I didn't hate the season. I didn't even hate this episode. It's more that I just think that Westworld has changed and I'll be curious to know where they go. But I'm going to be along for the ride because everything else that's out there, if you guys are watching TV right now, it's not all that great. So this is what we have. And I think they did a lot of good. And I love these characters and I love this world. And I'm along for the ride till it's over.
I agree, Ash. And not only do I love doing the podcast with you guys, the audience, it's the interactions that we have on a daily basis. You know, some people are just out there crazy. Some think the same way we do. The spectrum of viewers have made it an enjoyable experience for me. And I truly enjoy it for as much work as it is. And I will gladly be back for season 4. And hopefully you two will be as well. And everybody listens.
Well, until the Telegraph on Friday, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld Deep Dive. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitch at shatontv.com/Twitch. On Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at ShatOnTV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. Again, if you want to email us, that's hosts@shatontv.com or call 914-719-SHAT to leave a voicemail. Also, if you haven't checked it out already, Roger is doing his Florida Man show on Twitch as well at shatontv.com/Twitch, where you can catch him and his 2 co-hosts telling you the latest news out of Florida. And of course, our Shappy Hour on Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern, where we hang out. The audience is growing week after week. We love hanging out with you there. That is something we'll continue to do even after Westworld is over, even after we put the podcast on hiatus for a bit. We'll be there every week talking about Shat the movie, Shat on TV, and everything else in between. And look for lots more to come on Twitch as we kind of get out of the TV rotation and move on to the next thing. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, don't hesitate to check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we cover 80s and 90s movies. And visit our store at shatontv.com/shop, where you can find the latest in Westworld apparel and more. On behalf of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert, Ashley Schlafly, Roger Roper, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Friday for our Telegraph, listener mail, and voicemail covering the season 3 finale, Crisis Theory. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay the fuck at home.